Good afternoon, everybody. Well, I have to say this has proved to be a popular session. We've got quite a few people who've signed up for the event. So welcome one and all. No doubt we will have a few people join as they come in for their lunchtime as well. I hope all of your lunches look as edifying as the one on the screen. I'm sure when I get round to mine, I'll have something that looks a bit like that, hopefully. Can't imagine anybody's got it waiting for me. So welcome to this afternoon's sessions. My name's Eileen Roden. I'm one of the directors at PMO Learning. We've got a few more of the team on board who you may have met or been in touch with, Jen and Charles and Lindsay. Feel free to put your cameras on, open your chat box. There'll be chat going on in the chat box. So if you've got any kind of questions as we go through the presentation, feel free to put them into there. I'll be keeping an eye on it, but my colleagues will also be keeping an eye on it. So if I miss something, then you can kind of just put that in there. Now, if I do miss it, I'm not adverse to kind of people jumping in. So if you've got some questions as we go through, Zoom has the facility for you to put your hand up and wave at me or kind of ask a question. So happy that you do that as well. And I shall pick that up and make sure we cover all of your questions. So we're going to run today's session for about 45-50 minutes, and it's on the PMO Lifecycle. So this is only our second lunch and learn that we've done from PMO Learn. We thought we'd give an insight into certain elements that we train in a number of our courses. For those of you who perhaps don't know much about PMO Learning, we are a PMO training specialist. So we only deliver training that is related to PMO roles. All of our trainers are PMO experienced individuals. So they're either people who used to work in a PMO, or they're actually kind of still working in a PMO and do some training for us in amongst the other work. So hopefully the people who you'll get, well, I know the people who you'll get if you attend one of our courses will be able to give you some kind of real life examples, talk about a number of organizations that they've worked in and worked at in terms of dealing with some of the concepts that we're going to be talking about. So today's session is not necessarily a training course, it's what we would call a lunch and learn. So hopefully it's a bit of a session where we kind of portray a little bit of knowledge, build on some of the knowledge you might already know, but also generate some thinking and some questions that we can help and guide you through. So today's session is all about providing an understanding of the stages of a PMO life cycle and the key activities involved in each stage. And I saw Lindsay's questions there about whether life cycle was one word or two. I've always used it as one. When I went and did some bit of reading about this, life cycle apparently is definitely two words. Who knew? But I thought we'd start off with what is a life cycle? Yes, and I'm not kind of claiming this as any kind of particular dictionary, because it's really something that's been amalgamated from lots of different definitions, but it's essentially a series of stages that characterize the course of existence. We talk about the 7 stages of man was something that was written a long time ago, and says, we kind of go through something kind of every kind of 7 years or so, 7 stages in our life cycle. And so what we're going to talk about today is about the life cycle of a PMO. So how do PMOs start? How do they come into being? And what are the different kind of stages do they go through before they close or finish, if they're not an eternal PMO? And we'll kind of come on and have some of those conversations in terms of whether there is such a thing as an eternal PMO. So just out of curiosity, anybody want to put in chat about what brought their PMO into being? Any kind of, was it somebody decided they wanted one? Was it a big project, a large program in the organization, or just has it always been there for as long as anybody can remember? Just kind of curious as to what PMOs are out there, why they've been set up. So stick that in chat if you're interested in joining in. It's all quiet on the chat front. Okay, so somebody made a decision that they needed one. So kind of a single person initiated one? Or they've been around for a while? So when you if you think about your PMO, about where it is now, is it do you feel as though it's in a kind of a steady state, or is it kind of continuing to kind of evolve and change? Or is it kind of pretty static? Do you think it needs a kick up the backside? Or actually, are you in one of those PMOs that actually might be closing sometime soon? Where do you feel as if you had to describe the current state or the current stage of your PMO, what kind of state do you think it's in terms of an overall life cycle? So we're evolving and changing. So that's just for the Annette, you're evolving and changing. Are you definitely an evolution, not a revolution? What do you think? Definitely a kind of an evolution. Okay. Right then, so let's just take you through some of the, you would like a revolution. Well, that's a very interesting one. We'll come off, hopefully we'll cover off some evolution and some revolution in the conversation we're going to have over the next short while. So the theory is based on some work that was done by the House of PMO when they were developing the competency framework, starting to look at kind of how PMOs, where they sat in the organization, what they did and who worked in them. So when we talk about the PMO life cycle, it's, kind of relatively straightforward. It gets set up, it gets run for a while, it then might transform and then close. So nothing kind of hugely theoretical. Somebody decides we need to have a PMO, it gets set up. So there's obviously an element of design in that setup. Somebody needs to agree the size and shape, what it's going to do, how many people, what services are going to be involved. And then when it's set up, they're going to run it for a period of time. And interestingly, depending on how long the PMO is in existence for, it may go through kind of some transformation. And we'll come back as to whether that's kind of an evolution or a revolution kind of shortly. And then finally, at some point, the PMO will close. Now, I know that kind of makes all us PMO practitioners sad to think of some PMOs closing. But again, we'll come back to that and talk about whether that's a good or a bad thing. And what I want to do is I just want to take us through each of these 4 different stages of the life cycle and look at the types of activities that might be involved in each of these stages to help you understand perhaps where you might be, but also to start thinking about whether you're doing the kind of things that are in each of these different stages of the life cycle. So let's have a look at the first stage when we're setting up a PMO. Now, this is always a really interesting time for an organization, particularly when it comes to who determines that a PMO is required. So whether that is a PMO specialist who's been perhaps working in project delivery and doing some project support, but we've not had anything kind of formally defined as a PMO in the organization, or as a couple of you have mentioned in your comment, where somebody's decided, we're starting to do more projects and programs, perhaps we might need to kind of formalize project management a bit. Or actually what happens sometimes in a large organization where projects and programs have been around for a while, a part of the organization may decide, I think it's about time we had our little PMO, yes, to look after our projects. And interestingly, that kind of setup, you can have a relatively kind of standard set of activities that every PMO should go through in order to make sure that the PMO is set up correctly for the organization. So let's just have the 4 kind of key activities that we're going to be talking about in setup. So firstly is to look at who are the key stakeholders of the PMO. And as you know, when we do stakeholder analysis, we look at how much power or influence those individual stakeholders might have. And we also look at how much interest those stakeholders might have in the PMO. Now, depending on where we sit in the organization, that could be local to a particular department, local to a particular geography, local to a country, or actually it could be global. So it's interesting in terms of where our kind of particular focus might be. And within that PMO, it may be related to a particular project or program. It may be a selection of projects and programs. It may be across the whole portfolio of projects and programs for your organization. Again, lots of different kind of stakeholders involved. But even whether whether you're talking about projects, programs, or portfolios, you've still got some different nuances in there about, is it the project and program managers who are really interested in having things like some kind of standard way of doing things? It may be they just want administrative support. Oh, hush my mouth, some administrative support for their projects and programs. Or it may be senior management are saying, well, actually, do you know, we're spending all of this money on projects and programs and we don't know what's going on. So actually, they're really invested in finding out, well, we want some updates on a regular basis. We perhaps might want a bit more control of what investments we're actually making on projects. Do you know, we might want to start holding some people to account. They keep telling us these projects are going to deliver some benefits. Do you know, we want to start making that happen. So quite a bit in terms of from a stakeholder, a senior executive position. But I think the other people who we often forget about when we do our stakeholder identification in the setup, or those business as usual departments who have kind of two, as I say, two elements to this. Firstly, because somebody keeps taking people out of my department to go and work on projects. Yes, so I have to provide resources, and that causes me great grief. So the better visibility I have of when projects are going to happen, when resources are going to be required, when you're going to need my team to do bits of testing, that's really helpful to me as a business as usual department. But also, I don't want to be told on Friday night that, by the way, you know, that new system you were expecting is going live Monday morning. So I don't want my business disrupted. I want a better controlled transition of projects into business as usual. And if the PMO can start providing me with some of that information, can kind of help and ensure that we're appropriately engaged, that would be a really useful use of my PMO. So quite a broad range of stakeholders who will have a potential interest in our PMO. And we do all of the usual things. Who's really interested? Who's really got some kind of real power and influence? And then it's really important that when we set up our PMO, we start thinking about our PMO, we try to, certainly at the beginning, to think very carefully before we start offering it to be all things to all men. Okay, so I'm going to just quickly turn around and get the book. Where's the book? Here we go. So I don't know whether a few of you have seen this, the PMO service catalogue and some things the PMOs can do. It is a huge raft of particular services. And what we would never expect is for a single PMO to say, we're going to do all of that. We're going to do everything the project and program managers want. We're going to do everything the project teams want, everything the senior executives want. We're even going to play nicely with IT and procurement and finance and business as usual. We'll do it all. Yeah, very rarely are you going to have a PMO that really has that kind of vision and makes that kind of commitment. So the important thing is that we agree a vision for that PMO to make sure that the key stakeholders, the ones potentially who are going to fund it and support it and really be the people who keep that kind of PMO supported, understand and agree what our particular PMO is going to be about. Now, I suppose the other thing we also kind of need to touch on as well is recognizing what other PMOs are around the organization, because no PMO should be set up in a complete silo without any visibility as to what other PMOs are out there, what they're doing, what services they're providing, which stakeholders they're already addressing and looking after. So it's important that that kind of PMO vision is for our particular PMO, but it's in the grander scheme of the other PMOs across the organization. And then from that, we should be able to draw up a business case. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about a 20-page document, you know, with kind of oodles of kind of detailed analysis. Very often we don't, particularly in a low maturity organization, it becomes very difficult to create a pounds, shillings and pence justification for what we're going to do in the PMO. But what we can do is put in place some kind of key metrics and measures to say we're hopefully we're looking, you know, from the services we provide in the PMO, we are going to provide greater scrutiny over business cases. We are going to provide a standard project delivery framework to be delivered across the organization. And very often that PMO business case doesn't necessarily deliver benefits, doesn't state benefits, but it can state some outcomes. So when we put the PMO in place, this is what will be different in the organization. And because we have limited metrics, it's very difficult to quantify those in terms of benefits, but we should be able to describe and have some measures in place in terms of what's going to be different in the organization. And then when we're doing that setup, we decide on what the key services are that are going to really kind of put the PMO on the map, as it were. And this is often a real challenge for PMOs because as a PMO specialist, you think, I know how dreadful it is and how difficult it is to deliver projects. So the first thing we should do is perhaps let's start on the business cases. However, if your key stakeholders don't see that as the real problem, they see the real problem as, well, actually, I just don't even know what projects are out there at the minute. It is often more important to do those services that your key stakeholders see add value. Okay, because that's why they want the PMO set up. They've set it up to create visibility. Your PMO may not necessarily have the credibility for the execs or the project and program managers to listen and take your advice and guidance at this point. So as long as it's within that overall kind of PMO vision, pick those services that are going to demonstrate that you can do what you've promised to deliver for the organization. And so if that is actually, we will provide the ongoing visibility of the projects of the organization, then actually one of your first services might be maintain a register of all in-flight projects. Yes, we'll get to the business cases, but actually that might be the very first thing. And believe me, the number of organizations that start off with that service is immense. Yes, let's just kind of be able to provide some visibility of what projects we're working on. And I know I spent 18 months for a large international organization trying to find a list of all of the projects and who was working on what project. You know, so it can take a while to do that. So essentially what we've got now is we've got a functioning PMO that is delivering a number of services that are aligned to their PMO vision. And hopefully what we're in a position to do is start demonstrating that some of those outcomes that we've anticipated in the business case are starting to happen across the organization. And again, as we kind of evolve, now we're starting to collect some metrics, we may actually be able to put some real value on those benefits rather than just list them as a number of outcomes. And so we're in a position where we're running a PMO, you know, and what it always kind of fascinates me is not every PMO has a PMO manager. Yes, it may be a PMO lead. It may be, I have quite a few organizations where we have the PMO. Yes, in terms of kind of, and we talk about POs and POTs, a project office of one, or a PMO of one or a PMO of two. It's always interesting in terms of what their roles are. But essentially what they're doing now is this PMO has been set up as anticipated, and we're starting to deliver some of those services. And a really important thing to recognize is that stakeholder engagement continues through that running of the PMO, because, and I always tell kind of people who are setting up PMOs, really be careful what you wish for, because once they see what you can do, if you do it well, all of a sudden you get loads of support and they'll come with a list of 25 services. Why can't you do that by Monday? You've been selling me everything the PMO can do. Now I'm asking you to do it. You're telling me you can't do it. So yes, so we just need to be kind of careful what we wish for. But essentially what we're doing when we're in this kind of run stage of our PMO is we're actually kind of delivering an ongoing roadmap to develop and deliver more and more services. And bear in mind that some of those services will start shutting down as we start new services. The expectation is that your service catalog, the list of services that you deliver in your PMO, may well flex over the life cycle of your PMO. Let me just give you a couple of examples of what I mean by that. So we're in a low maturity organization. Risks are something that we're at our organization we don't do very well. And so the PMO says, right, then we're going to increase risk management and our risk management capability in the organization. So we're going to set up some services from the PMO. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to maintain a risk management process on behalf of the organization. So our Centre of Excellence will create some templates for the risk register. What we'll also do, there'll be a mandatory service that any project through the initial stages of the project, the PMO will come and facilitate a risk management workshop to make sure that at least the risk register starts off in a good format and is embedded into the plan. And then at each stage gate, it will be looked at and reviewed. So those are some risks. Quite, I say straightforward, depends on your organization, but some, kind of some easily recognizable, acceptable risk management services that we might offer for the PMO. However, what might happen over 3 and 4 months is actually the new projects that are being kicked off are all being led by project managers who've run previous projects and have had us run those workshops and do the initial identification, fulfill the risk register. So over a period of time, what we might say is, well, actually, that risk management workshop, which used to be mandatory, can now be optional if you've run a project before. If you've not run a project before, then actually we're still going to make it mandatory. But we're changing the terms of that service. And essentially what we're doing is freeing up some time, which might allow us to do some additional new service. And again, rather than us maintaining the PMO register and kind of checking every one, we may say, well, actually, we'll check a random 4 risk registers a month just to make sure that everybody's on top of risk. So again, freeing up PMO resource to perhaps look at some other services. So even though you're in a steady state and you're still providing risk management services, the nature of those services will change over a period of time and potentially reduce the number of hours or kind of work that's involved in those services, which allows you then as a PMO to look at other elements. Now, we would still see this as in a run in a kind of steady state. So I think going back to kind of what Annette was talking about before, essentially this is just a kind of a slow transitional kind of evolution to be the PMO we need it to be. And while we're doing that, we are, as it's got there, we're doing some performance management. We're going back and looking at our vision and saying, are we actually delivering the outcomes and hopefully by now the benefits that we'd anticipated when that PMO was set up? Now, we all know that change happens. We can't have all missed COVID in the last couple of years, and there may be something that really means that the PMO needs to completely change direction. So we get to a point where we're not just kind of evolving, we're kind of new services and evolving with the maturity of the organization. There may be a strategy change. There may be a reorganization. There may be a divestment or a merger. There may be a whole new strategic program kicked off. But then we actually kind of go into transformation. So this is really where we go into kind of a revolution rather than an evolution, because what we're saying here is that the purpose, the function, the vision of the PMO, as we originally anticipated it, is actually needs to fundamentally change. Okay. Now, and we could just kind of shut the PMO and set up an a new one up. But actually, what we want to do is we want to take all of the good things that we've had, look at where we need to be, and then go back and kind of repurpose the PMO to be what it now needs to be in our organization. So again, we go back and we do that kind of stakeholder review. Are we talking to the right stakeholders? And it looks very much like, kind of the setup. We go back and do our vision review and we update it to the new purpose. And essentially what we're doing here is we're doing a gap analysis of kind of where we are now and where we need to be. So it's not going to be kind of an overnight, but essentially what we're doing is saying we recognize that the purpose of the PMO has changed and we want to make a statement about that. We're going to do that by actually having a new vision for the PMO and a new structure. And we're now going to formally move to, so we've kind of been transitioning kind of services off and on, but we're now going to do a kind of a formal, actually, because our vision no longer requires us to service all of the country. So I worked in a PMO where we covered off the whole of the organization, then we split it into a wholesale and retail. So if I'm sitting now in a PMO that says, actually, our PMO is now just going to serve the retail arm of the organization, then actually I need to think about how the services shut down against all of the wholesale part of the organization. So through this kind of transformation, that transition from old services to new services is much more kind of in bulk, and people will see a step change in terms of what's required by your PMO. And then essentially, we go back to run, but at some point we'll get into transform and think, there is a point now where actually we need to formally close the PMO, where for whatever reason, and we'll kind of come on to that in a moment when I go on to the next bit, we start thinking about this PMO, the vision that it was set up for the PMO, it has delivered, or actually we, transforming it is really not kind of going to answer that vision. So we're going to formally close down the PMO. Now, remember, one of the important things that we need to think about as well from transform and close is recognize that as we do that transformation and as we close the PMO, the relationships with other PMOs in the organization. So what needs to be kind of passed off to other PMOs, what information needs to be mothballed, what information perhaps needs to be destroyed, kind of that doesn't necessarily need to be picked up further on down the line. But we should have an orderly close to our PMO. Okay, an important part. And there we have, in essence, the kind of the start, middle and end of a PMO life cycle. But I just want to add a kind of a little bit more to that. Anybody got any questions about those 4 stages? Anybody going through transformation? And it's a really interesting one. How big does the change need to be before your evolution really needs to be a revolution? And in my head, your evolution is fine as long as you're still within your vision. As soon as you're kind of starting to be asked to do things, or the view is changing and your PMO is expected to do different things, potentially you're then up for a kind of a revolution through transformation. So Annette, I'm sorry, only because you joined in the conversation earlier. In terms of, I'm just curious as to, you said you're going through an evolution. What things that you need to drive a revolution? If you've got a minute to put that in chat, just curious out of that. So interestingly, that's I've put that up there as a is a life cycle for PMOs. Now, for those of you who know the PMO competency framework and the work of the House of PMO, we'll talk about the different types of PMOs. But what I just want to quickly talk about is how we go through each of those activities. So you're talking about a significant change in the company strategy. Yes, and I would agree in that particular, Paul, you're talking about that rather than it. Yes, that would, to me, would drive a transformation rather than than just an evolution. So as we go through the PMO life cycle, one of the things that we need to do, and it's one of the behaviors that we talk about in the competency framework, is that we should lead by example. If we are setting up a PMO for an organization, we should be using a project or program life cycle in order to set that up. Okay, so because the setup can be seen as a project in its own right. I mean, if it's a big organizational portfolio office introducing new processes and a new tool, you might actually want to run that as a program. But as a minimum, it should be seen that setting up a PMO, we have our requirements, we have a project team together, we have the business cases we've talked about, we have a plan, and we have that set up, and we use a project or program methodology to deliver that. Now, the great thing is that if we're introducing a project or program methodology, guess what? That's where we get to pilot that methodology. That's where when the project managers come to us and say, can you give me a good example, Eileen, of a change request from, we say, you remember when we had that change as we were setting up the PMO, let us show you some exemplars from our particular project. So typically that's going to be a project or program. When we're in run, we're in business as essentially PMO business as usual, and then into continuous improvement. And there is an argument, yes, that actually the setup and run can actually be delivered using an agile methodology. Yes, you're in a kind of constant state. You have a constant backlog of services that your organization wants the PMO to deliver. You look at each one of its merits, reprioritize, and then you have some sprints, kind of 2 to 4 weeks, where you're introducing new elements of service as you go. So we're not tying you into waterfall, definitely an agile approach to this. When we're doing the transform, again, we're going to be running that as a project or program, and also the close should be delivered as a project or program. So giving us plenty opportunity in the PMO to practice, to develop our delivery skills, to get real experience of filling out all of those templates. Us PMOs love to get the project managers to fill in. And I think it's also really important that we reflect back to the organization and do our weekly and monthly reporting and say, this is one of the projects that the organization is invested in order to be more successful. So we should comply with all of the kind of the standard rules and regulations in terms of those various projects. Okay, just a quick question. And do we think that PMO lifecycle applies to every different type of PMO? Any views? Francis is a yes. Well, I'm happy to settle for a yes. Let's just kind of take us through what that might mean. So in the competency framework, there are 4 different types of PMOs identified. Again, it's in the P3O manual as well. 4 different types of PMOs. There's a kind of a standard project office, which is a temporary office. Now, temporary is interesting because that means it has a finish, doesn't it? So we definitely know that's going to close. So a temporary office set up to support the delivery of a specific change being delivered as a project. The program office, obviously kind of supporting a program. A portfolio, interestingly, the terminology changes now because we're now talking about a permanent office So actually, should one of these offices ever close, and that's looking at projects and programs at an organization, division, department. So again, it might be a sub-portfolio as the total portfolio, or a center of excellence, again, another permanent office that develops the standards for projects and programs. So I just wanted to have a quick look at perhaps the impact of the type of PMO might have on the PMO lifecycle. So when we're talking about project and program officers, they are, by their very definition, temporary. So absolutely, we would want them set up to, at the start of a project or program, to start that project or program. And we absolutely expect those PMOs to shut at the end of the project or program. So when the project's been completed, you would then want to do a kind of a formal close down of your project office. When your program is completed, you would want a measured and orderly shutdown of your PMO. So happy with all of that. And there's lots of misleading statistics out there about how many PMOs shut down after how many months and years. And I think we have to remember that for project and program officers, they absolutely should shut down. They were set up with a vision to support that particular project and program. And therefore, when that project and program's finished, we want to shut them down. The question is to whether project or program officers actually go through the transform. And I would suggest for a project office, it is unlikely to go through that transform stage. Yes, it's likely to be set up, run, and then close, because typically projects are weeks and months, and it's the programs who are months and years. Okay. Interestingly, though, a program office may well go through a number of transformations. Anybody got any suggestions about whether a program office might actually do that kind of transformation? So if you think about the life cycle of a program, and again, programs are very much in months and years, the likelihood is that actually your structure of your PMO, the purpose of your PMO, the activities of your PMO may change quite considerably through the different phases of a program and through different tranches, because the content of some of those program tranches might be completely different to the previous or the kind of the next tranche. So potentially your program office will go through and can go through a transformation between each of those phases. So again, when we're putting our kind of a program together for the program, when we're doing our initial kind of setup of the program office, the important thing to recognize in that setup is what is the expected life cycle, sorry, the lifespan of this particular PMO. So it may be quite justifiable when we're setting up a program PMO to say this program office, its purpose and its vision is to do this. It's anticipated that as we move from this phase of a program to the next phase of the program, the PMO will transform the services offered to match whatever that next kind of phase or tranche of the program might be. Okay, so project officers unlikely to go through transform, but program officers potentially through the different phases of a program. So when it comes to portfolio officers and centre of excellences, well, actually, it's a little bit different, because these two actually are set up as permanent officers. And it's always really interesting to say, well, Eileen, why are you justifying closing down a permanent PMO when surely they're kind of set up to be eternal PMOs? These kind of permanent PMOs, we would expect to transform through different, and we've already kind of talked about some of the reasons why that PMO might change, whether it's kind of an organization change, a strategic change. Do you know, sometimes sometimes it can be a change in the head of PMO, or it can be a change in the PMO sponsor in terms of they just see something. And it happened to me when I was in an organization, the head of IT changed and they had a completely different view about what they wanted their PMO to do. So the key stakeholder had moved on and we had to kind of go back and revisit what the vision was for that PMO. But I think the important thing to recognize is that we need to be honest about the fact that actually some permanent PMOs actually might need to close. And again, it's not the fact that it's going to close and kind of we're going to throw all of the PMOs out in the organization. We just recognize that this particular PMO might actually no longer fit within the overall P3O model, the holistic integrated PMO model in the organization. One of the things that we talk about in the managers course, the House of PMO Essentials managers and directors courses, and we also talk about it in the P3O course, is that any particular PMO should be in a wider integrated PMO model. So the head of P3O, the kind of the PMO director, sits there and looks at the organization and says, how best can I, with my team, support the delivery of the strategy and the success of the organization? And at one point that might be kind of a portfolio office in every country, supported by project and program officers. The strategy, the geographic might change of the organization. And actually, it is the overall design of that integrated PMO model that's going to change. That P3O structure is going to change. And therefore, even though what might be seen to be a permanent office may still need to kind of formally close down. Now, I think the important thing is that whenever we close our PMO down, we maintain somewhere in the organization a copy of what was our vision, our service catalogue, and our operations handbook, because at some point further on down the line, another PMO or a new PMO may wish to kind of switch on some of the services that we've had previously. So we just need to be very careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater when we're doing that kind of formal close down. So there we are. Doesn't 45 minutes fly? Yes. 45 minutes on the kind of the PMO life cycle, how it relates to the 4 different types of PMO. Anybody got any questions that they want to put in chat? Hope that's been useful. We do have a whole range of training specialists and PMO specialists here at PMO Learning. So if you're thinking about where your PMO is, you want some help identifying where it is in the life cycle, you want some help kind of creating your vision or kind of developing your service catalogue, do get in touch. We can either help you as an organization and kind of do some workshops with your team, or we can provide one-to-one coaching for you to help you do your role within the PMO. So any questions, do get in touch. You can contact us on our website. We've got some training courses coming up. We've got a busy schedule now through the next quarter. For those of you who know the P3O certification, where we talk about in a little bit more detail the activities involved in design and set up the P3O, that's actually starting tomorrow. I'm sure, Jen, I'd love to fit you in, but we do have one later on next month. We're talking about benefits management at the beginning of February, essentials for PMO administrators, and then the PMO practitioner on the 13th or 15th of February. If what we've talked about is interested in you, but we haven't got the course you're looking for, our contact details are there on the screen. Go and visit our website and get in touch. Have a great lunch and a great afternoon. Thank you very much.